さかお前リスナーレッドに変身してみたかったのか。いやわかるぜ。
Personally growing up, I was more about building out the mechs, which I do nowadays with Mini-Pla. They wasted no time this week by not only completely forgoing the opening, but also by starting with Togo already being rescued after last week's cliffhanger. Confusing, kind of. Unwarranted? Not really, especially considering what we're about to get in this episode. Anyway, said saviors included the obvious significant lady from the last episode, who were all part of a La Resistance that lived just outside of the town and out of the range of the Lord's magic. With that, our heroes were able to regroup and discuss their next course of action. Of course, retreat was always an option, which some of the members of this group even chose to do so. Thus, the remaining members were all of those who honestly wanted to restore this town to its peaceful and familial state. Good world building that also led to a little development for Togo, as of course he related with them. You say that, and yet several seasons have ended with the civilians becoming stupid and turning against y'all. Hell, I think your blue can even attest to that. With that, 3/4 of our heroes discussed their plans. Logi was just kind of being low G. But yeah, with the town pretty much under total police state, they considered attacking from the outside. Don't worry, Yusan isn't around to yell at anyone. But yeah, with Megazord raids out of the question, they decide to be like the Precure and go back to the basics by having their two attackers fight back to back, which would be easier said than done, as of course they got along like oil and water, though to be fair, at least those two liquids usually do their own thing rather than trying to kill each other. Thus, it fell on the princess to act as an intermediary between the two, though mostly with her putsy knight. Anyway, it wouldn't be an Isekai / shonen anime without a little fan service with the two girls who are supposed to be 16 and yet both didn't quite look their age for different reasons. That said, in situations like this, some viewers tend to overlook these scenes, believing that they are just there for the cheesecake, even though they can be used for some good character building moments. It comes from the old Japanese idea that people who go to the bathhouses tend to loosen up a little more once they get into the relaxing baths, and will open up even as they're in the bath. In this case, they revealed how Teletina learned about Idra, in spite of never actually meeting her until the previous episode, through the research that she continued to send to the capital, in spite of her family's exile. And it was a good showing of Idra's character, as she continued to uphold her father's ideals of helping people, even if the higher-ups had turned their backs on them. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if most of her message were largely ignored by them, but even if she was yelling into the void, she likely at least hoped someone heard her, and sure enough, she did. Good stuff. With that, Teletina left the bats before Idra, and didn't bother to tell Togo, and in fact lied and said that they were empty. Best or worst wingman ever, you decide. However, before he left, she also inquired a little more into the Red Sentai's motivations. Oh great, the Kyoryuger complaints came back. But yeah, as we'd see in a second, he did have his reasons for his somewhat reckless solo actions. All the while though, a certain knight likely only heard the praises his princess was giving someone else, thus while Togo was in the bath, he took his transformation trinket. Somewhere Timefire is watching and saying that you should treat your red a little better there, dude. As a result, the siege of the Lord's castle opened with Togo being taken out early and thrown into the castle's moat. This resulted in likely a near-death experience, which let Togo have another flashback again to his show, this time episode 46. And yeah, if you know your 4-core series, that's an episode that's usually at least fairly close to the end. I mean, for reference, Boom Booger is going to end this weekend with 48 episodes. Thus, you would wonder why this lady who Togo was about to call Silver, as in Kizuna Silver, wasn't around for their final battle in the first episode of this series. But then, looking at Togo's flashback in that same episode, plus the opening, and the fact that she raided Mikoto Nakadai's closet, and it all starts to make sense. The first actual 6th Ranger of Super Sentai, Burai, did die, and ever since then, it's been kind of a coin toss on whether or not they'll live. Fun fact, there were plans to kill off Tommy and Eric like their Sentai counterparts. But the former became so popular that they didn't kill him and in fact brought him back, and the latter was kept around because apparently the producers didn't like how his death scene came out. Also, Hai Mao kind of knew that they would have to bring in the most successful Sentai turned voice actress ever eventually.
声が似てるような。
But yeah, she ended up raising some significant death flags by talking to Toko about how he feared losing all of the bonds he had forged, hence why he did everything he could to protect the people he had bonded with. Yet ironically, that over-attachment to those ideals might have led to Silver's fate for all we know. Anyway, he managed to avoid reuniting with her in the afterlife thanks to Idra, who heavily implied that she used CPR on him, which, come on girl, it doesn't count as your first. Meanwhile, the Knight of Stands of course insisted that he could handle the Lord on his own, and to his credit, he did prove to be a one-man army, mostly thanks to his sword having about as many form changes as the average Kamen Rider. As such, he did have some legit multi-form balance and could adjust on the fly. Though the thing is, like many RPGs, it's impossible to go into a quest alone, and you can't soul them, at least without sacrificing other members of your party, which he wasn't willing to do, at least with a certain someone. And in a pretty clever parallel with Togo, we saw Loji's flashback, albeit without an episode number, so it was a lot lamer. But yeah, unlike the admittedly kind of privileged Togo, who likely had all of the inherent gifts of the Red Sentai protagonist, he was far less fortunate, as in spite of being chosen by the Holy Sword, it was mostly because he had an abnormal lack of mana that it would forcibly siphon off from its user and exhaust them. Thus, he was labeled as an other, which, at least according to Talatina, upset him, which again essentially made him the total opposite of Togo. And on top of that, the princess unknowingly turning him into a total simp, i.e. giving him a very unhealthy codependence on the princess, resulted in our current Putz Knight. Though, very fortunately for him, he now had allies who were actually willing to work with him in spite of him being a thief and a liar. With that, Loji himself outright confirmed his parallels with Togo and how he tried to get rid of him in order to make sure he was never replaced. Now, of course, I do really appreciate that we have reasons for his actions, and it does immediately create an interesting narrative with Togo. I'm just saying it doesn't stop me from finding the guy annoying. It's kind of like my feelings for Hisui in Mirai Days. I can appreciate the story they're telling, but I'm also not obligated to like the character, especially when his boneheaded decisions have led to such stupid outcomes. Hell, I was more interested in learning more about Taltina's backstory that heavily hinted that one of her main motivations was the death of her mother, as well as how she wanted to break down the barriers between the social classes, as she really didn't want to have to work with the snobby upper crust, and instead went an abandoned knight like Loji. Also, yeah, you gotta love how these characters went through these overdramatic fairy tale-esque talks whilst ignoring how Idra and her barrier were starting to fall apart. I told you you shouldn't be drinking buddies with the Konosuba cast. Anyway, we then got an okay action scene. I mean, that insert song is always fire, but the way they took out the monsters was just kind of there. Still, it was good to see Togo and Loji finally kind of work together. However, the day wasn't won yet, as the episode ended with the Lord taking on his final form as a very hairy version of Majora's Moon, and no, I'm not making a metaphor Refan Tizo reference, I haven't even played that game. In spite of the lack of the show's usual explosive action, this was easily the best character building episode so far. Pretty much everyone got some moment that expanded on their lore in interesting ways, especially the heroes of the two worlds. Yeah, I still don't really like Loji personally, but if their story is good, I can kind of get around that stuff. I think it was a really good call to skip the opening and even kind of rush to the beginning of this episode, as they clearly needed to get across a lot of character lore in just about 23 minutes. The girls did get relatively a little less, as we already clearly knew that Idra was fulfilling her father's final will, and Taltina's stuff was a little more set up for later. Still, both of their moments were nice, as they effectively highlighted the good nature of both girls. Conversely, the boys revealed relatively more of their backstories, and in turn, some of their more negative qualities. I mean, I think I've already kind of hounded on Logi enough, but Togo does seem to suffer from survivor's guilt for failing to protect Silver. Thus, he does tend to obsess in protecting others, to the point that he ends up breaking a few of those precious bonds in the process, especially when they've led to his own destruction. Contrast that with Logi's backstory of fearing rejection, hence why he avoids making bonds in the first place, and yeah, that kind of highlights how the two make for the ideal combo. It's good storytelling that does kind of get around my issue with Logi being annoying with all of his constant Tina simping. As a result of all of this, the action did take a bit of a backseat this week, as they also had to introduce the Holy Sword, but considering even that was for the sake of the story, then I can still say that overall, this was a really good episode. I think at this point, the only thing I'm really weighing on is for Luca to say her signature catchphrase that even her other characters do end up saying. Thank you for watching again. Yeah, this and Gav will be moved one day ahead, as we just had to add another show to the schedule. I mean, at the very least, our schedule will clear up a little by the end of the season, and frankly, I think all of these shows deserve to be highlighted, plus, more ad reviews is also nice. Look forward to whatever comes next, and until then though, farewell for now my friends, and he always likes to play from the great beyond.